I was, when I was very young, when I was about four or five, I was watching TV one day and I think it was The Shadows. Remember Hank Marvin and The Shadows came on, and I was fascinated by it, but it was nothing to do with music at all. It was the fact that the guitar was electric and it had dials on it and switches, and so I got fascinated by the technology of it, and that interest brought me into music. So it's sort of fitting in a way that I ended up being in electronic music, which is obviously very technology driven. So my interest in music from very, very young up until today really has to some degree been technology first and music second. I like messing about with the technology, and the technology makes music, so it's the two go together. Well, actually, when I was 11 or 12, we had a group in our street called the Monkey Juniors, and we would go into people's houses and mime to Monkey records for sweet money. So I guess that was the first band I was ever in. Then later on, Mark Bolan and T-Rex came along, and that was my first real love. Yeah, I loved T-Rex, and it was that made me really decide that being in a band was, well, being in the music business really was what I wanted to do. So then I messed around with local bands for a while, school friends and that kind of thing. And then I joined another band just as a guitar player in the background called the Lasers. Then the same thing happened really. I said, do you do any of your own songs? And they didn't. So I said, well, I've got loads, I've been writing with this other band. So at the end of the first rehearsal, they were doing all my songs, and we'd renamed it Chubiami after some short stories that I was writing. And I went from being a guitar player to the singer. I had intended to just stay in the background with that band, but at that time and at that age, I was just really pushy and driven really to want to do something. So that band became Chubiami. We went out doing punk gigs, that kind of thing, but not for very long. And got signed by Beggars Banquet. Beggars put me into a studio to make what should have been my first punk album, because they'd signed us as a punk band. I went to the studio, and in the studio control room in the corner there was a mini Moog synthesizer that had been left behind by the band before. It should have been collected by a hire company, but they didn't turn up, so it was there for the whole day. Back to the record company 3 days later with this electro punk album, or punk electro album, which they wasn't happy with at all. It just wasn't what they was looking for. But luckily, they didn't have any more money to send me back to the studio to do it again. It was a really small label. Really lucky. One of the few times of being with a small label with no money was actually a good thing and worked out well for me. So they put it out as it was, and it actually got reasonably good reviews. I like Kraftwerk, but I wasn't really influenced by Kraftwerk. When I got into synthesizers, I had no problem with guitar, bass and drums. I liked the conventional lineup. All of the people that I'd admired over the years had that kind of a lineup. So I wasn't interested in going a purely electronic route. I wanted to add electronics to what I already loved. So on Our Friends Electric, for example, which is now labelled the first ever #1 electronic single, there's guitars in it and bass and drums. The whole becoming famous thing, I didn't handle that very well at all. I got Asperger's syndrome, so I actually find it quite difficult sort of interacting on a day-to-day level. And so I suddenly found myself as a fairly quiet, shy person, known by everybody. And I would do the things I did before. I would go to the same shops and walk the same streets I did before. But then everything is different. People know who you are. Some of them are very nice, too nice, really. It's kind of overwhelming. And quite a lot of people are not nice at all. And quite intimidating and quite frightening. You get a lot of threats, and so suddenly your life is changed on every level, in every way you can imagine, and it takes time to get used to that. And I think the younger you are, the harder it is. I think if you're a solo act, which I was effectively as Gary Numan, it's more difficult because you have no band to share it with. I didn't have any management. I doing it myself for the first year or so till my dad helped me out. The record label that I was with was a brand new record label, so they had no experience of anything like that whatsoever. So it was, and it was very sudden. You know, I went from being totally unknown to being #1 in about 2 weeks. When we were doing massive tours, and we were selling them all out within a few days, you know, it was very, very successful. But I didn't make any money from live shows until 1998. So nearly 20 years I've been doing it before I actually made any money from shows whatsoever, because it all went back into the
production.
Yeah, and I got ripped off quite a bit as well, but a bit of both. I grew up thinking or believing that when you became successful, you gave something back. And so not only were my shows the biggest around at the time, but they were also some of the cheapest at the time. My tickets were cheaper than most people's at the time. In the early days, when I first started, I was very, very much, I just did what I was told. There was this illusion that I was in control of everything, but I never was really. And that, again, one of the reasons why I pulled out of the whole thing, because my whole life was being guided and run by other people. You know, I'll be told to, and it was damaging as well, damaging the career. I'll be told when to go to America, where I was going to play in America, what sort of places, everywhere. You know, so for example, you know, I've never been here, for example, never come here before. Big chunks of Europe I've never been to, because when it was doing well, I was sent to places, and I knew no better really that my life had become just a big blur, and it was so manic and hectic, and I was struggling with all of it. I didn't actually feel settled with any of it at all. You know, I was even doing things like little radio IDs, you know, hello, I'm Gary Numan and you're listening to KCRW. I used to hate that. I used to get really embarrassed. And then, you know, the career starts to slide and things are not so good. So I concentrated on the UK. Let's save things here and get it going again. You know, build ourselves back up in this country, which we know really, really well. And then we'll start to move back out again. And it looked as if my career was going to, you know, good start, very short time, and then disappear. That's how it felt. And so I panicked a little bit, went back to England, concentrated on just making albums, stopped touring for a bit. And then it took us a long, long time to get back together. I mean, it went on for 1992, I guess. I mean, I was dead and buried. Couldn't sell tickets, couldn't sell albums, had no record deal whatsoever.